I rise to give my contribution on the interim budget presented last week. Budgets are a declaration of priorities and choices, and the choices being made in this budget are repercussions of poor decisions this government has made over the last 11 years. We're in a mess because of cost blowouts on projects like the Birth and the Spirits, because of the overuse of consultants, because of a broken complaint system in the public service that doesn't deal swiftly with employment matters, often resulting in workers' compensation claims for psychosocial injury and lengthy, expensive investigations. We're in this mess because of poor workforce planning and pork-barrelled election promises. My first thoughts when I read through the budget papers was that this budget appears to be treading water. It keeps us afloat, but it takes us nowhere. A budget should be a vessel that brings us forward. I, like many Tasmanians, are concerned about our rising debt. The budget demonstrates that this government have no plan on how to deal with it other than sacking public sector workers and delaying promises that those opposite made to the community just a few short months ago. Reading through it, it's evident that this budget doesn't invest in workers, it doesn't strengthen services, and it doesn't inspire confidence for the future. Because when we cut jobs and weaken services, we're telling workers that their contribution is expendable, and we're telling communities that their needs are negotiable. But when we invest in people, we build a stronger, fairer state, one where every worker has dignity and every family has security. And that's why this budget fails. It fails vulnerable Tasmanians, it fails children and young people, it fails people desperately waiting for housing. It fails public sector workers and the community services sector, the very people that are holding this state together. It fails because this budget is built on cuts, broken promises and debt. Now, those sitting opposite have been at pains to say in the last week or so that Labor are negative. It must be in their talking points for this week. Well, I would love to hear a plan and some positivity from those sitting opposite, because I can't see a coherent plan from this government on how to move our state forward. I was hoping to hear that from the Treasurer last week, or indeed from the Premier yesterday. Exactly what is his ambition for our state? Because Tasmanians want to know that, Honourable Speaker, what the future has in store for them. The Premier has overseen a budget crisis and he's put the Honourable Treasurer, Erica Betts, the man who cut 14,000 Commonwealth jobs, in charge of fixing it. And Tasmanians know what that means. It means cuts to jobs, it means cuts to services. The Treasurer says he reduced the size of the federal public service through natural attrition. That gives me no comfort when he talks about right-sizing the Tasmanian public sector right here in Tasmania, because calling it natural attrition doesn't make those job losses any less real. It's not attrition if you've planned for it, and it's not natural if you've budgeted for it. Someone still has to do the work. It doesn't disappear when someone retires or if they burn out. Whether you cut the roll or you let it die slowly, the impact on Tasmanians is exactly the same. Fewer people delivering services that all Tasmanians rely on. And now, with 2,800 jobs now on the chopping block, there will be serious consequences for our communities. Cutting public sector jobs is a choice that reshapes communities and it narrows opportunities for Tasmanians. And we must ask, whose future are we protecting with these decisions, and whether saving dollars today will cost our communities more in social and economic harm tomorrow. The Treasurer has been spinning and sidestepping and pretending that these so-called savings won't hurt frontline services. But anyone who's ever worked in the public service or relied on the public service knows the truth. And, Honourable Speaker, I'm not just worried about frontline services. I'm worried about the public sector workers that keep our communities ticking: court clerks, flood planners, project officers, auditors, research officers, library workers, compliance investigators, payroll officers and administrative staff, because we know that they are the staff that are most likely to be hit first. The government think they can cut those roles and nobody will notice. But our community will notice, Honourable Speaker, especially in our regional towns where those jobs are so important. Departments have been ordered to freeze jobs, delay recruitment and quietly let vacancies build up, and it's already having an impact. Now, the budget also assumes a 2.5% wage increase for public sector workers, even though the government's already made an offer of 3%, and it will need to be a lot better than that for unions to agree. Treasurer Abetz has admitted he's told agencies to find savings to make up the difference, and that's on top of a $300 million efficiency dividend, which, by the way, is the laziest way that the government can actually make changes. What we really want is those structural changes. That's what needs to occur. Really, you're just asking departments to tinker around the edges. Now, CPSU General Secretary Thurza White said of the budget, it's a fantasy document, a renamed efficiency dividend with no vision for reform, and I agree. Thurza went on to say that it's a slash and burn plan that risks privatisation and big job losses, and I agree with that too. Because the fact is, public sector workers are being shortchanged to pay for Liberal mismanagement. This government keeps talking about efficiencies and savings, but out in the real world, things are already falling apart. And now, while workers are struggling to keep up with rent and mortgages, groceries and bills, this government is dragging its feet on fair wage negotiations. A take it or leave it offer tells us everything about this government's attitude to workers. They would rather dictate than negotiate. The Minister for Education, Children and Young People got up in Parliament just last week and said that unions gave their log of claims in September and took strike action in October. In actual fact, public sector unions provided their log of claims for the PSUWA on the 20th of May. The log of claims for allied health workers in her department, that's the child safety officers, school social workers and speech and language pathologists, that was also provided on the 20th of May. When the government say they can't afford a fair pay rise, what they really mean is they've chosen not to. Because over the last few years, they've found money for consultants and reviews that just go ignored. They've found money for glossy advertising campaigns. They even found money for a chocolate fountain, which thankfully is no longer on the cards. But what we've found out over the last week is that they're telling us they can't afford to give public sector workers, the people who keep this state running, a decent pay rise. They've even cancelled their bargaining meetings because they don't want to hear from workers and their worker representatives. Now, Honourable Speaker, we know it's not just cuts to the public sector that will also have an impact on, we know that cuts to the public sector will also have an impact on the community services sector. Tascos said this interim budget was simply a vehicle for the government to bide time with a thinly veiled warning of the need to find savings and efficiencies. They also said government expenditure should be prioritised to essential services and supports that enable Tasmanians to fully participate in the economy. Kota Tasmania, representing older Tasmanians, said of this budget, there's a lot of noise and not many changes. When organisations that support the most vulnerable say that this budget is noise and delay, we should listen because they are connected to communities and deeply understand the needs of Tasmanians who rely on us to make good choices. It's evident that this budget is not just about public sector workers being squeezed, it's the community services sector too. These are the organisations catching Tasmanians when government systems fail. Neighbourhood houses, homelessness providers, family violence services and youth programs. They report that cases coming through the door are increasingly complex, which is not a surprise. They're keeping people fed, housed, safe and alive while running on grants that don't even keep up with CPI. Funding is indexed at a rate that doesn't match the rising costs of wages, rent, fuel, electricity or insurance, the basic costs of providing support. When indexation doesn't cover inflation, it's not holding funding steady, it's a cut. So I look forward to seeing the progress from Minister Ogilvie on longer funding contracts for the sector because he can't build stability with a 12-month contract. You can't fix disadvantage with funding that expires every June 30. The sector doesn't need gratitude, it needs certainty. It needs real indexation. It needs contracts long enough to retain staff, plan ahead and focus on helping Tasmanians, not just surviving from one funding cliff to the next or having to come up with a new shiny project each year. If we want strong communities, we must fund the people who strengthen them. Tasmanians are bearing the cost of incompetence from this government. Tasmania will spend nearly $2 billion on interest repayments in just a few years, around $500 million a year. We're now spending twice as much on interest repayments as we spend building homes for Tasmanians. We need a plan, because this debt we have and cuts will have consequences, Honourable Speaker. In our classrooms, educators are already sounding the alarm. AU Tasmania President David Genford said, "Educators have lost confidence. The budget does nothing to address violence, heavy workloads or burnout. Classrooms are already running on empty." But this government refuses to listen. Schools are just expected to do more with less. Teachers are exhausted and leaving the sector, workers' comp's increasing and kids are missing out. And despite the handful of scholarships finally provided for allied health professionals in schools, there's a long wait list of students who need support from a speech and language pathologist right now. Those scholarships are just too little, too late. School social workers are stretched between 4 or 5 schools, despite the Australian Association of Social Workers recommending a ratio of 1 to 500. That means that kids are missing out on the support that they need. They are falling through the cracks. Now, I can't help but feel nervous that the Honourable Treasurer Betts's budget will lead to privatisation by stealth. We know he likes small government. He told us that just last week. When a government freezes recruitment, refuses to fill vacancies, demands ongoing efficiency dividends and deliberately underfunds workforce growth, you create a crisis. A crisis that then can be used to justify outsourcing and privatisation. Because if you hollow out the public sector for long enough, someone will eventually say, hey, the public service can't cope, we'll have to bring in the private sector. That is privatisation by stealth. And I note this government already has form on this because just this year they outsourced a very large body of work in child safety to Tradewind. This time last year, the advice and referral line had a backlog of 2,000 calls relating to abuse and neglect of children. I notice I've just got your attention. It's because it's true. Your face is going the same colour as my jacket. Rather than adequately resourcing this service, you outsource the waitlist. Outsourcing child safety work, the most sensitive, trauma-informed work of government, is nothing less than a disgrace.
No, we weren't recruiting.
Children deserve continuity. They deserve stability.
Yeah.
They deserve trusted relationships with trained caseworkers who live in the state, who aren't in Melbourne, who aren't in Sydney. They deserve people who are here, who are Tasmanians, who understand our communities. You should be ashamed. No wonder you're on the backbench now, no wonder.
Order! The only one who has the call at the moment is the Honourable Member for Bass, Mrs Greene.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. They deserve better than a revolving door of short-term contractors hired to meet KPIs. That decision sent a clear message to Tasmanian public sector workers that this government would rather funnel money into private labour hire companies than fix its own workforce planning. It was panic spending and our kids deserve better.
Remove the backlog and
Shame.
fully staffed.
A shame. And you know what? A lot of that backlog was in the northwest coast where you were. You know that you didn't have enough workers there in your own backyard. Those workers told you. I know they did. I know they did. Honourable Speaker, every Tasmanian deserves good public services. Every single one of us. I'll come to you next. The healthcare that treats us when we're sick. The schools that educate our children, the emergency services workers that protect us, SES, Tas Police, Tas Fire, radio dispatch services. I'll have to tell you later how many phone calls dropped out yesterday because there was no one to answer the phone. Forensic science services, biosecurity workers who are protecting our island state, parks and wildlife officers that protect our environment and also support tourism in this state, which is extremely important for our economy. These are not luxuries, and yet under Premier Rockcliffe, these services are stretched to breaking point. Hospital staff are burning out. Beds are blocked because radiology and pathology departments remain understaffed. Wages are simply not competitive enough to retain workers. That's why I note the last Health Minister provided a market allowance for those workers. That will need to continue until the Allied Health Professional Agreement is signed off on. And as I said earlier, that log of claims was provided to the government on the 20th of May. So it's been 6 months they're waiting. 70% of all clinical decisions that happen in a hospital require a diagnostic test, like a blood test or a scan, but these critical teams remain under-resourced so people don't move efficiently through our health system, and it also means they don't get the support that they need. Those opposite know it's true, but they haven't done enough to resolve it. Our courts face relentless backlogs. Victims of crime wait months, sometimes even years, for the Office of the DPP to review their files. That's a poor outcome for workers and our community. Justice delayed not because of the law, but because of staffing shortages, and that is a threat to community safety. This is not a government that values public services, and the budget proves it. It treats the public service as a cost to be cut, not as an investment in our future. And when you treat services as expendable, you treat the people who deliver them as disposable. Tasmanians deserve better, and so do the workers in these critical roles. They deserve respect, resources, and a government that stands with them. Tasmanians trust us to educate their children, to keep them safe in hospitals, to deliver homes and provide fair, reliable services across the state. This budget breaks that trust. It undermines frontline capability and it threatens regional equity. It shifts costs onto workers, families and communities. Tasmania deserves a government that invests in people, not one that sacrifices them. If we choose to invest in workers, protect the vulnerable and strengthen the services that underpin our communities, we will build a Tasmania that inspires confidence, attracts investment and gives every person the chance to thrive. That is a legacy worth leaving, and that's what our state needs. Thank you.
Thank you.